Hi, everyone. Good evening. I am Professor Nancy Sinkoff, the Academic Director of the Alan and Joan Bildner Center for the Study of Jewish Life and Professor of Jewish Studies and History here at Rutgers University. And tonight I am moderating the second of a three-part series by our Norman and Cyril Reitman Visiting Professor, Dr. Daniel Stein Kokin. The name of the mini course is Points on the Map, the Rhetoric and Representation of the Jewish Presence in the Land and State of Israel. Tonight's session is called Sum of All the Points. Kol HaNikudot, all the points, is a leitmotif of this three-part mini course. The ground rules for the course are familiar to many of you, I believe. You are muted during this presentation, but your chat feature is not muted. So please join us in participating by putting in questions. And if you have brief comments into the chat, I will be moderating the chat throughout the teaching session. And I will pose them to Dr. Stein Kokin halfway through the course at around 25 minutes and then towards the end. Closed captions are available for this session. On your screen, click on the captions or on the three dots to enable them. Be aware that the simultaneous translation is not accurate when it comes to foreign words. So it is a little bit of a challenge at times when you realize that it doesn't understand Aramaic and Hebrew and other languages. So that's just the feature. I'm sure it will change with AI, but right now that's what we have. The mini course is being recorded and you will be able to have access to it later. It will be up on the Bildner Center website. So it's my pleasure to welcome my colleague, Dr. Daniel Stein Kokin. Some of you met him last week, but for those of you who didn't, he is again the Norman and Cyril Reitman Visiting Professor here at Rutgers this term, this fall. He is a scholar of Jewish studies affiliated with Arizona State University and the upper school librarian at the Ramaz School in New York City. He is an expert in rabbinic literature, Jewish-Christian relations, and particularly the Renaissance period of European history. But he is also very engaged with the study of Israeli music, film, and art. And he is the founder and creator of Kol HaNikudot, All the Points project, which produces interactive online maps tracing the history of settlement in the land of Israel, past and present. He's held a number of prestigious scholarships and fellowships in both the States, at Brandeis, for example, and also in Italy. And we are so delighted to have him here. Daniel has been a wonderful presence at Rutgers this term, and we'll miss him. And I know that you will enjoy this second part of this three-part series. So thank you for joining us tonight.
All right, well, thank you very much. I'm going to just get my screen going here, and hopefully you can see my screen. Thank you so much, Nancy, for the kind introduction. Greetings to all, wherever and whenever you are watching this. Welcome to round 2 of Points on the Map. So last week we examined the culture of nekudot, or points, the terminology. We examined the culture of using this term, nekudot, or points, for new settlements, and we examined how this terminology, how this trope played out at select moments in the history and culture of Zionism and Israel. Most prominently in the 11 points in the Negev, Eser Nekudot BaNegev, that played such a critical role in securing that southern desert region for the state of Israel. We saw how it became customary to refer to newly founded communities as points, or nekudot, by way of reference to their status as contributing to the emerging map of the Jewish state. Each new community was, so to speak, od nekuda al hamapa, another point on the map. So we saw that the map, in a sense, was primary, and the communities mattered only insofar as they contributed to creating that map, which led to a certain degree of critique, especially as we got into the 90s and we looked at that, and into the early 21st century. And we saw that as via the famous Tipek song Ma'ale Avak, about a fictional town in the Israeli south, and we looked at the writings of the architect and critic Sharon Rothbard. So that was Sorry, that was last week. And next week, we will turn to points of the imagination. That is how writers, composers, filmmakers have deployed non-extant imagined places as mirrors to the real Israel. And I would say it's not surprising that given the centrality of settlement to Zionist ideology and Israeli identity, you'll recall the basic law that we looked at last week, which emphasized settlement as an erech leumi, as a national value. It's not surprising that so many creators have imagined communities, have used imagined communities as a way of analyzing, critiquing, or responding in some form to Israeli society. But today, our focus will be my digital humanities mapping project, All the Points. So the common denominator across all this series, as you heard, is points. So digital humanities, umbrella term for projects that combine programming tools with the kinds of questions that interest people in the humanities and social sciences, grappling with the history and structure of societies and texts. Naming the project All the Points signals my desire to engage with a trope that has wide historical currency in Zionist and Israeli history and culture, and it also makes the mapping project an opportunity to teach about Israeli culture. And of course, the hope with digital humanities projects is that the use of tech enhances the learning experience and, or ideally both, leads to deeper layers of learning. So, but at the same time, not only does naming the project All the Points engage with this culture, this trope of talking about points, but it enables me to make a significant programmatic statement. For the points that we spoke about last week were, of course, all Jewish communities, created again to help establish, fill in, or expand the map of the new Jewish state. My project acknowledges this notion, it acknowledges this tradition, but it inverts it in a sense. Because instead of the points merely leading to the map that they help create, in this project, the points themselves become central, they become primary, they become the key to telling the story. In addition, my project expands upon the notion of points by including not only Jewish communities, but the communities of really all groups that have been present in the land. Arab, of course, but also European Christian, Bosnian, Circassian, and so forth. And hence my decision to title the project not just All the Points in English, but also Kol HaNekudot in Hebrew and Kul Al-Nukat in Arabic. The goal of the project is to document who has lived where and when and in what kind of community in this land. This project, and it's important to emphasize, it does not address who should or should not have been there or be in a particular place now. It is not aligned with any particular proposed plan or solution for the problems the region faces. As a historian, I see that there have been innumerable plans for the region, but that no plan has ever simply been realized as intended, if at all. This land has other ideas. My goal, again, is simply to try to represent what was and is, year by year, or in some cases, even month by month. If you're a committed Zionist, All the Points displays the achievement of the Zionist dream quite vividly, but it also, quite starkly, showcases or shows the Nakba, or the Palestinian term for the destruction and catastrophe that accompanied the founding of the State of Israel from their perspective. The goal of All the Points is to try to be as fair and objective as possible, to create a pedagogical tool that will be useful in the classroom, but also in private homes or for researchers, really for anyone who wants to get a better understanding of how this region has evolved over time. All the Points makes use of GIS technology. GIS refers to Geographic Information System and has been defined as follows: a computer system that analyzes and displays geographically referenced information. It uses data that is attached to a unique location. Specifically, I use a program that is well known in the GIS world, ArcGIS. Basically, I compile my information on all the points in a spreadsheet, as you see here. The spreadsheet gets fed into the program, and out comes a map or series of maps. And here, just a foretaste of what we'll see more of in just a few minutes. Of course, it's never quite that simple. There's lots of things that can go wrong. There's a need for code. The maps need to be shaped in various ways. But in theory, it's terrific because, as we shall see shortly, it enables an interactive map that addresses one of the key weaknesses of traditional print maps, namely their inability, or at least extreme difficulty, in conveying change over time. Now, obviously, producing any kind of map raises a host of questions. When are you going to start it, a map of this nature? When are you going to end it? What geographic space are you going to include? And in the case of a map dealing with this particular region, how are you going to refer to the territory? So let me just take a few minutes to address some of these questions, and then we will turn to the main map itself. Because I want the map to be as politically neutral as possible, I opted to start it chronologically in a historically significant but not controversial year. And so I chose 1840, which is the year that the Ottoman Empire, which down till World War I controlled the entirety of this region. In that year, the Ottoman Empire regained control over Palestine that it had lost for a period. I used to say that all the points goes up to the present, but since October 7th, that has become more complicated. And so for now, it goes up to 2023 because it's really hard to capture what exactly has happened in the interim, and there's still so much uncertainty really about what communities exist, say in Gaza, and where things are headed. So for now, it goes up to 2023. Because the map documents the history of settlement in the Israeli context, I include points that extend beyond the internationally recognized borders of Israel. So the map incorporates settlements that once existed in the Sinai Peninsula and also in the Golan Heights. And for purposes of the map, I refer to the Israeli-Palestinian region. That terminology enables me to reference the two main nationalities present in this territory without addressing issues of political entities and official boundaries, which of course have changed dramatically over the period examined and remained very contested. So we, of course, just very brief overview where we start. We're in the Ottoman Empire. Here you see a map of Ottoman Palestine, how it was divided up into sanjaks. Then we had the period of the British Mandate, World War I, down to the foundation of the State of Israel. Here you see the districts of the State of Israel. And then, of course, after 1967, Israel's borders expand, as we saw in the earlier map, and the map, of course, includes those communities. So two main goals of all the points: to convey change over time, again, the thing that printed maps most struggle to do, and to convey diversity at any given time. This is so important in this region where there has been such tremendous change demographically over the past century and a half, and where also there is such a wide variety of different kinds of communities, different in terms of ethnicity, different in terms of ideology, different in terms of religious status, both within the Jewish community and outside it. And just in terms of the demographic change, it's just, if we go back to Palestine in the mid-19th century, of course there was a Jewish presence there, but it was quite insignificant from a demographic perspective. What you see here in green are Arab communities. So most of the vast majority of the communities at the time were inhabited by Arabs. And then if we jump to the present, we see over 1,000 communities have been founded in the context of Zionism and the State of Israel. And this project documents that development. And again, tremendous diversity among these types of communities. So I want to head now to the map, but we'll have time to talk more about the different kinds of communities, and I'll make some comments as we look at the map. So I've now passed over to what I refer to as the main map of all the points. And basically the way it works, you see on the left, we have basically the various layers, and different communities are indicated via color and shape. So you see here Arab community at the top. Arab communities are in green, but then the map also differentiates among different kinds of Arab communities. standard Arab communities, Bedouin Arab communities, Arab communities that are majority Druze, Druze being an offshoot of Islam that goes back to the 11th century. And we can talk more about the various distinctions among Arab communities, but the same applies to kibbutzim, moshavim, the various kinds of settlement. I'll say more about them as we come to them. So here down at the bottom, you have a time bar. And I'll also note that you can manipulate the time bar as you like. You can look at a wide period of time, or you can go year by year, you can move forward, you can move backwards, you can filter out different kinds of communities. If you're just interested in Arab communities, you can filter out the Jewish ones. If you're not interested in the Arab communities, if you just want to explore the history of the kibbutz movement, you can filter everything out and just look at the kibbutz. For right now, I have everything in, and we're just going to start the map. And initially, you won't see too much change, but I can already point out, you see these points in magenta along the coast. Those refer to European Christian colonies, especially the German Templars, a Protestant sect, a pietistic sect that founded about 8 communities in Palestine in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Now I'm going to just zoom in a little bit. You start to see these yellow dots. These are moshavot. These are the early Zionist farming communities that were involved, basically private. They were small farming towns. People had houses. They had plots of land nearby. And now as we head into the second decade of the 20th century, you start to see other colors emerge. You see red and black points starting to show up. So I'm just going to pause for 1 second. The red points are kibbutzim, which began, the first one goes back to 1909, Degania, here along the Sea of Galilee, along the Kinneret, shores of the Kinneret. And the kibbutz was, as I imagine many of you are familiar with, a socialist or even initially leaning communist kind of community in which property was shared among the entirety of the community. In just a moment, we'll see how the kibbutz movement spreads. And then you'll start to see black points as well. Black are the moshavim, which have elements of cooperative life, but not to the same degree as the kibbutz does. So the moshav model there are different versions there's the moshav shifuti, there's the moshav ovdim. There's a degree of pooled resources, but people have their own homes. They eat at home. They cultivate their own crops and so forth. We can talk more about all these different types of communities to the degree that you're interested in. If we scroll down a little bit, you also see blue communities here. Those are cities. And as we head into the 20s, I'm just going to zoom out a little bit, and I'm actually going to, yeah, no, we're good. I wanted to pause here. We're just going to filter out Arab communities just for a second so you can basically see. I'm just going to go back a little bit. As we head into the 20s and 30s, we start to really see the contours of what became the state of Israel emerging before our eyes. And in particular, I want to note this N pattern. Scholars often refer to sort of the N of settlement in pre-state Israel. Basically, lots of communities along the coastal plain, along the flat coastal plain. Then in the northern valleys here, this sort of the slant of the N really takes us through the heart of the Jezreel Valley. I referred to the Jezreel Valley last week briefly, Natan Alterman's song.
Daniel, I have to interrupt for a second because I'm not sure what I'm seeing on my screen. I'm not sure the map moved. Maybe I'm wrong there, but when I heard you clicking, I didn't see a visual change. So
what do you see right now?
I see a lot of green.
Oh, okay.
A lot of green. Yeah, now
that's better.
Now the filter for the Arab communities is gone.
I see. Okay, good. Thank you.
So you know what? I think you need to go back and explain because we weren't seeing
what I was talking
I heard the clicking, but I did not see any movement on the map visually.
About that. So here, basically what I was talking about, and you heard me even if you couldn't see what I was talking about, as we head into the 20s and 30s, we basically see the contours of the state of Israel emerging before our eyes. And I was referring to this N of settlement here. And sorry, here where I'm now drawing the cursor, this is the Jezreel Valley that I referred to briefly last week. we really became sort of a key block of Zionist settlement in the 20s into the 30s. And, um, and now I'm actually going to restore the Arab communities because as we head into, and I'm just going to go year by year here, as we head into, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more, um, as we head into the 40s, and we will see here, very dramatic year, 1947, and then into 48, you really see suddenly the disappearance of, a substantial number of Arab communities. That's, of course, during the War of Independence, or as Palestinians say, the Nakba, in which a lot of those communities disappeared, and for reasons that are contested. But I'm just documenting what was there and what happened. Communities that existed or didn't exist. And then in the early years of Israeli statehood, you see just a massive wave of settlement, primarily kibbutzim or moshavim, especially in border regions, basically to sort of shore up the borders or the periphery of the new state. And then if we just, as we move forward in time, and then after the 1967 Six-Day War, we start to see the beginnings of settlement on the West Bank, initially here in the Jordan Valley, and then as we head into the later in time into the 70s, actually, as we talked about a bit last week with Sebastia and Ofra, we start to see in the central highlands of the West Bank, the settlement moves into that region, and that basically takes us through into, basically more or less continues down to the present with the continued expansion of the settlements in the West Bank, but also in other places, especially in the Galilee, in the Western Galilee, this region, where there had not been so much Jewish settlement, really begins in earnest in the late 70s, early 80s. So just a few things that I'll comment on here, and you'll stop me when it's time to take some questions. You see a lot of purple in addition. And purple, I referred briefly to the community settlement or the Yishuv Kehilati last week, specifically in the context of Ofra, which really marked the introduction of this new form of community, which was a small rural community that was not collectivist in any way, so departing from the kibbutz or moshav model, but did care very much about having a very strong community identity or community cohesion. And so the Yishuv Kehilati is a community where you actually have to apply and be accepted if you want to join the community, if you want to move to it. Again, because each Yishuv Kehilati is concerned to maintain its particular social or religious character. One thing that I also want to point out, and I'm going to just take us back in time, is if we go back to the back into the 19th century, you do see there are communities like this one, for example, which is Peki'in in the north, or here you have Tiberias. Sorry, there it is. Tiberias, which were mixed cities. Here you have Haifa also. So the map also does indicate places where Arabs and Jews cohabited, both in the past and in the present. And if we jump back up, you'll note also, you'll see a number of orange points. Here's one. Those are Nachal outposts, because an important aspect of settlement in the post-independence period, beginning in the early 50s and down into the 80s in particular, there was a branch of the Israeli army called the Nachal. It's actually in some ways best known for its very famous entertainment troupe, La Kata Nachal. But basically, Nachal is an acronym for Noar Chalutz Velochem, pioneering fighting youth. And basically, as part of their military service, these soldiers were sent to basically create military outposts in border regions to do some agricultural work alongside their army work. And then eventually these communities were transformed from military outposts into civilian communities. So that's a very important feature, facet of Israeli settlement history that all the points documents. Now, one other feature that I want to take a look at right now is that in addition to these points and the ability to see how the map has evolved over time, there's the potential for also comparing the map with political realities or political plans. So, for example, if we go back to the 1930s, you can basically add the Peel Commission plan. This was the first serious plan that was proposed for partitioning Palestine. As the British began to understand after the 1936 Great Arab Revolt that it was.
Daniel, I'm interrupting again. Is it possible for you to make, we can see more of the territory right now? We're sort of cutting off the top blue.
Yeah,
Is
it's
there
hard.
a way to, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, look, you can zoom in or out,
right.
and
Okay,
depending on
thanks.
what I'm showing, I don't want to. Yeah, I apologize if I'm confusing, if it's confusing for people not to see the whole territory. But Israel is not particularly big, but it is quite tall, and so it can be a little bit difficult. So here, I just want to point out with this plan, you had the green swath was the proposed Arab state. The blue swath was the proposed Jewish state, and then the red swath, leading basically from Jaffa near Tel Aviv on the coast into Jerusalem, was where the British planned to maintain their mandate, to maintain their control. And so, what I think is really nice about this feature is there are lots of places where you can see a map of the Peel Commission plan, but all the points enables you to compare the plan against where what settlements, what communities existed at the time. And so you can very nicely see how the developers of this plan were trying to basically create a Jewish territory that would include the vast majority of the Jewish communities at the time, and with enough territory that the state would potentially be viable, while of course maintaining the majority of the territory for the envisioned Arab state. If we jump forward in time 10 years, we go to 1947, we can switch from the Peel Commission plan to the UN partition plan, and we see how different the plans are, and we can also compare that against the changes that have taken place in terms of settlement in the intervening 10 years. So one thing that I want to draw our attention to, in last week's course, we spoke a lot about the 11 points in the Negev down here, and I talked about how they were instituted actually to help ensure that this region would be allotted to the state of Israel. And in fact, it worked because these communities had been established. The UN partition plan actually did allot the majority of the Negev to the Jewish state. By contrast, though, it did not allot much of the north to the Jewish state. The entirety of the Western Galil was to be allotted to the Arab Palestinian state, because as you can see, there really, as of 1947, was very little Jewish settlement in that region. So that's, and then
Why don't we pause here?
sure, let's pause there.
Um, because I think there's, you went through it very quickly because you're so familiar with it, but I think it's important that people understand, first of all, the extraordinary aspect of this is what you said, that most maps are static. I mean, I happen to love maps, but anyone who has, say, an old map of where they live, for example, an old paper map, and then if you pull it out of your drawer and it hasn't ripped and you look at it, you realize it may not have streets that are now there. There may be new highways. And so you think it's sort of obsolete. The beauty of this digital GIS map that you've made is not only all this comparison, historical comparison that we can talk about, but the fact that it can be updated.
Yes.
It's live. It's truly live. And that's extraordinary. And also the color codes, again, you're so familiar with them, but I think it's the green is Palestinian Arab or Arab Israeli or Arab, and the blue is Jewish settlements, and then you have the pink and the mix. It really, if you I mean, again, it's a little bit too small on our screen, unfortunately. But
Oh,
if you look at the whole region, you see all these colors, which means that the binary, and I'm not saying there isn't a real conflict between Palestinians, the Arab world, and the modern state of Israel. There is. But it does elide the complexity of who actually lives in the region. And some of these communities have extremely long histories. I mean, I'm not sure you mentioned them, but I'm sure other people do know Armenians who date their settlement in this region to they're the first Christians. And the Armenian Quarter for them, where they live in Jerusalem, is one of the oldest settlements of the Armenian diaspora. So I think that that is one of the extraordinary aspects of this project. So we do have some questions. I just sort of
oh,
wanted
good.
to emphasize why I'm so excited about this. But we have a bunch of questions. So one is, do your maps or how do they deal with communities that historically were not, quote, settled communities? They were nomadic,
Yeah,
such as Bedouin.
yeah,
And of course, that's part of the challenge because today there's tension between Bedouins who become urbanized and Bedouins who have not. But how do you, are they on your maps?
yeah. That's an excellent question. It's something that I've struggled with. I have to start by saying, and this may sound like a cop out, and perhaps it is, no map. It's impossible to represent everything on a map, and a good map will inform, but also inspire further study. And there are also on the website there are also commentary. There's also commentary, and there will be more. More is in the works. I haven't figured out a good way to indicate nomadic communities in this context. Um, if you have an idea, please. I am definitely interested in documenting Bedouins, as I pointed out in the I have a special shape for Bedouin communities, and I'm very interested in documenting where Bedouins are living. I'll also note that you see the map distinguishes between recognized and unrecognized Arab and Bedouin communities. This is really relevant only for the most part, post State of Israel, where both because of internal displacement on the part of Arab Israelis, but also Bedouin Arab Israelis. New Arab communities were founded, but not necessarily recognized by the state. But especially in recent years, and especially in the Negev, but not only in the Negev, there have been a lot of communities, places where Bedouin have sort of settled, but it's not necessarily where Israel wanted them to settle. But this, as far as I'm concerned, I'm interested in showing where a community exists, regardless of its status, regardless again of whether people think that someone should be there or not. And that applies both to a West Bank settlement or to a Bedouin community. So yeah, I wish there was a nice way to capture the Bedouin more migratory presence, but again,
So,
I'm not
yeah.
going to do
So I want to mention there's another great question from the same person, but someone who's happily very engaged with the course. And then I want to mention I actually this is a little bit in-house that I have one of my favorite books is the Historical Atlas of Central Europe, and it's not interactive like your maps, but it has a variety of maps. So I want to segue to the question, which asks a question
it.
about the kinds of maps. Your map, or this, what you've shown us so far, is a map of, are maps of communal settlement or communal establishment, right?
Yeah,
Um, but, but our student or our viewer is saying, well, it's two-dimensional. What about the topographic aspects of, and one could, I would even add sort of access to the sea or access to water. So those are topographic and or climate or and so there is often in two-dimensional atlases you might have a map of you know arid versus water. You
Mm.
might also have a map of religious establishments or something like this. So the questioner is saying, it would be of value because it is true that there has been in some of the settlement movements, there has been the desire to be up high,
Yeah.
and in the valleys are Palestinian or Arab communities. And of course, the whole issue of the sea.
Yes.
And this is true of every society. So that's something I want to be very clear. If you look at a map of the continent of Africa, it makes a really big difference if you are landlocked or not as a country, because
Mhm.
in terms of commerce, economy, connection with other people, so access to the sea and access to water, particularly in the very dry Middle East, are very important aspects of mapping this region. So that's sort of a comment and a question about the topography and can you show that on your maps?
Yeah, that's a great point. I don't have it yet, I confess, but I do definitely plan for there to be a topographic base map that one can have instead of this more political one that we have at the moment, and that'll be useful because it'll also, yes, help one understand some of the how topography has influenced settlement patterns. So actually, just to go back to this N of settlement, I'm going to just sort of retreat a bit out, and I'm going to remove the Arab communities again just for a moment, and I'm going to remove also the sorry, the Peel Commission plan. So you can see again the coastal strip, the Jezreel Valley, and then really valleys along the east. Why is that? Why was that way? Well, because there was a lot less settlement along the coastal strip because there was a lot of sand, there were a lot of swamps there. The Jezreel Valley was actually one of the areas that was less settled. It was actually historically the Arab villages were more on the hillsides. So it was actually the valleys where the Jews could settle. And so a lot of what you see here around the Kinneret and then moving to the north are valleys, again, and the Jezreel Valley here. So it was the sort of the flatlands, it was the highlands, the central highlands, where as you see, as of 1943, virtually, practically no Jewish presence whatsoever. Or again, in the Galilee, for much of the Galilee, aside from the coast, virtually no Jewish settlement presence, because again, that was the highlands, that was the mountains, and there were already a lot of villages on the hillsides there. So it's actually an interesting shift in more recent decades that there has been such a focus on settling the hilltop, and that's in part for strategic reasons, um, issues of political control. It's also sometimes an issue of what's available, so that again, the Arab communities are often on the hillsides, but the hilltop is maybe sometimes available, though of course certainly Arab lands have been seized for purposes of constructing communities. It needs to be said. So yeah, but it's really as we head into the late 70s that we start to see both a lot of settlement activity in the highlands of the West Bank and in the Galilee at around the same time. And this is actually offers me a good opportunity just to make quick reference to some of the curated maps, and I can show some slides of them later on. In addition to this main map, there's various curated maps that we're working on that home in on specific aspects of the settlement story. And one of them is called Home on the Hilltop, and it actually juxtaposes the mitzpim or settlement outposts that were built in the Galilee beginning in the late 70s, early 80s, and the West Bank highland settlements that also started around that time. It's two sets of communities that are not typically thought of uh, side by side, but I actually think uh, from a geographic, from a topographic perspective, and also in terms of the chronology, they have a lot in common. They were also both spearheaded by Ariel Sharon at the time, very back then was already a very influential Israeli political leader, especially in matters pertaining to settlement. And so, yeah, I think it's part of the goal of the curated map and the project as a whole is to push people to think in somewhat different ways about this story. So thank you very much for the topographic point. It's critical. Yes.
Yeah, I want to just add to it because it's making me think sort of those really fantastic observation about that the earliest pioneering kibbutzim and moshavim were in valleys because the goal of agriculture, right? The importance of being able to grow things and growing on the hillside is more challenging, we know, but that also, it's sort of another mapping, sort of another key that one could look at, right?
Yeah,
Agriculture,
yeah,
or because the difference between communities that have survived through groves and shepherding versus communities that are, have thrived through pardesim, orchards and winter wheat and things like this, the role of irrigation. I mean, it's really a geographer's dream to add all those disciplinary key points in terms of this project, meaning your project and also the creation of the modern state, because all those things were factors.
yeah,
And the military piece, which I think you haven't emphasized, which is fine, but also where could communities, Jewish communities, be defended, and what did that mean?
yeah.
Also played obviously an important role in those decisions. And then I would say the water piece, which again, I'm not expecting you to answer, but I think going forward, if the climate doesn't completely, I don't want to go to my worries there, but water is such a precious resource and such a precious resource in this region. And the whole question of the Jordan River, the other small rivulets,
Mhm.
the Galil, the Kinneret, the Dead Sea, it's dry, as everyone knows, it's receding. How is the climate crisis and water going to affect a future map of this region? And I don't have an answer, and you're not required to know what comes next, but it's just an interesting beyond the topographic sort of the agriculture. And I'll say one other thing about this. It's a little bit of an anecdote, but it's a true one. I knew, or I know actually, a scientific researcher, a biologist, who was looking at animals in the Arava Desert and looking on both sides, the Israeli side and the Jordanian side, and trying to get an understanding of the health of these animal communities. And no surprise, they were healthier. If you were going to map, fauna on your map, they were healthier in the non-agricultural sections of Jordan than they were in the highly cultivated Israel, the Arava.
Yeah,
So there are lots of things to think about when we think about this land,
yeah,
not merely the mythos of it, but people living in it, growing things in it, extracting resources from it, defending themselves against their neighbors, working with their neighbors. Anyway, it's just sort of a comment, but I
yeah,
want you to go on, and
yeah. Well, I
I'm
just
gonna
want to
take my audio off and my face
Well,
off.
I just want to quickly comment on that because it does give me an idea that it might be interesting to map the spread of the water system of the Mekorot water system of the pipelines uh, over time, because that would very much relate to what you're talking about. And in fact, alongside the establishment of these communities in the Negev in the 1940s, there were water infrastructure was built as well, and there's some indication that that infrastructure also played a role in leading the developers of the partition plan, the UN partition plan, that is, to allot the Negev region to the future state of Israel. Yeah, so let's see what I'm going to do now. I'm going to go back actually to the PowerPoint, and because I want to talk a little bit about some of these curated maps. I'm just going to show you slides of them. Um, so let's see. There we are, and I hope that you can see. I hope you can see what I'm showing. I had a lot of other material, but showing you how I classify things.
Well,
Yeah.
Daniel, do me a favor. You're clicking too quickly for me,
Well, I
which
want to
makes
get
me
I want to get actually to the curated maps just before.
okay. Okay, but you did sort of tantalizingly show us some things before. So you want to land where you are now, which is this um, a map that shows actually uh, some of the topographic, geographic
Yeah, well, yeah, this
climate.
is
Okay, go
relevant.
ahead.
Given the question, this is relevant. You can see very nicely here the
Right.
coastal, basically at sea level, And then you can see here, here's the Jezreel Valley, and you can see very nicely how I talked about how here in these highlands in the Galilee and here in the highlands of the West Bank, there was so little settlement before. It was mostly in these eastern valleys, across the Jezreel Valley, and in the coast. But I wanted actually to jump to, I'm actually going to stop sharing for just a second, switch to where I want to be, and then resume my share. And so just bear with me a second, because sometimes you don't know what exactly is going to come up or be valuable for people. Okay, yes. So now I am ready to start sharing again. But where did you go, Zoom? Oh no.
We can see you with no trouble.
Yes,
So,
you can see me, and I'm just trying to
and we
find.
can hear you.
Yes.
We can't see anything else though.
Yeah, I know, and I'm just trying to see. This happens sometimes in Zoom where you sort of, I don't see where the Zoom guy went, so that I
Look
can.
at the bottom on the search bar at the very bottom. There's usually a ZM. Yes? No?
Well, yes, no, maybe so. Well, I'm going to start talking while I'm looking for this, and I'm so sorry that it's. Um, there we go. Here it is. Share screen. Here we go. All right. Hopefully you can
Yeah.
see this. Yeah. So what I wanted, we actually addressed Wall and Tower briefly last week, but I want to just sort of show you some of the curated maps that are accompanying the main map. So
Can
uh,
you explain what you mean by curated map? Saying something
yeah,
that
sure.
a source that you're working from? Is that what a curated map
Well,
is?
no, so the main map that I showed you up until this point is basically it's sort of everything. And you basically the viewer is invited to play around with it as she or he likes. You can filter out as we saw, you can filter different kinds of communities in and out. You can move forward or backward chronologically. You can click on points to learn about them, also important to mention. But here in these curated maps, they're sort of like map exhibits in a sense, where I really just sort of focus in on a particular aspect of the story. So this map, for example, is concerned with the Chomal Migdal communities, the wall and tower settlements that coincided with the Great Arab Revolt and coincided with the time where it began to be clear that there was likely to be some kind of partition of this land. And so these were these communities that were basically put up overnight. They were just basically a wall and a tower. And you see here the map of all those communities. In this curated map, what's different about it is it goes month by month. So you can really see how these communities were just emerged again in the matter of a couple of years, nearly 60 communities of this pattern established. Here you see some more pictures of that. Then here are, I'm going to just focus on, so I spoke about the home on the hilltop map before, and here you see a composite of all the points that it includes. Again, juxtaposing the Galilee communities and the West Bank communities, two forms of phenomena of settlement, not typically put in context with one another, but again, happening at the same time. The communities tending to be placed on the tops of hills, and the architecture looking quite the same, the sort of distinctive red tile roofs that we've grown accustomed to associate with the West Bank settlements, also very prevalent in the Galilee. Then if we look also from military outpost to civilian settlement in the middle, I referred briefly before to these Nahal communities. So this is a map that really showcases basically how these communities were founded and then as military outposts and then evolved into civilian communities, typically either kibbutzim or moshavim. Another whole other set of communities that were involved in studying are those on the Golan Heights, and has a very complicated settlement history, which is just sort of showcased here very briefly. If we go back to 1878, late 19th century, there was actually, for several decades in the 19th century, there was actually no really settled permanent presence in the vast majority of the Golan Heights. There were a lot of Bedouin tribes, to go back to the earlier question. Then, in the course of several decades, really hundreds of communities are established. But then, in the context of the Six-Day War, all but a handful of them, all but basically five, disappear from the map. The inhabitants of these communities flee, the communities are destroyed. And so, right after the Six-Day War, you had four Druze communities way in the north, and then one Alawite community, the Alawites being another Islamic sect, uh, right on what became the Israeli-Lebanese border, but which had previously been the Syrian-Lebanese border. And then far on the right, you see basically schematically represented what the Golan Heights looks like in recent years, with both the continued existence of these Druze and Alawite communities, and then Israeli settlement as well. And then just looking ahead to next week, we have a map of all these imagined points culled from literature, music, film, and so forth. Um, let's see. I don't know if we should take some more questions, or if I could talk a little bit more about the different communities that the map shows.
I we have a question, and
Yes.
it would be fantastic if you could illustrate it going back to your map. So
Yeah.
say your project, you get lots and lots of funding and it becomes bar and bat mitzvah presents for everyone. And um, you have a student who says, I'm really interested in Mishmar HaNegev, or I'm really interested in Kibbutz Be'eri, or
Yes.
I'm really interested in Ramot in
Yeah.
Jerusalem, or I'm really interested in Shiloh, whatever it is,
Right.
um, or the Silwan Valley. But
Yeah.
I want more than just to locate it. I want to get information about it.
Yes.
Are your Where you are at the project now, can you get additional information, or is that going to be something you're going to add, or is that not something that
So in
interests
many
you?
of the points, if you click on them, you do have there's a link to say the Wikipedia article about the.
Can you illustrate that?
I can try. I just let's see. I'm afraid that I might. Let's see. Here's actually an interesting story. So this one doesn't have it yet, but these white squares. Here, there's one, and up here are the two Circassian villages that we have in Israel. Let's see.
Can you explain
Yes.
to those of us who are not
Yes.
familiar
Yes. Yes.
what a
Yes. Right. Yeah.
Circassian village
Circassians are a
is?
Central Asian, non-Arab Muslim people who the Turks brought in to a certain degree, deported them from, or brought them in to Palestine and other parts of the Middle East that were under their control, and and these communities were established back in the late 19th century. You see here 1877, and have been present ever since. And the Circassians are actually very interesting people in Israel. They're Israeli citizens. They serve in the military, like the Druze. They're Muslim, but they're non-Arab. They have very distinct culture. So let's see. I don't want to just sort of randomly try to a good many of the points, and do in fact link up to Wikipedia articles. And the hope moving forward, I would love actually for when you click on a point to actually have a variety of information about the point there, not just the very basic information, but yes, that it would invite you to explore to explore this community. There are so many fascinating stories, and part of the goal of the project is actually to shift our attention away from the main centers, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Haifa, Beersheba, that we talk about constantly, and actually to excite people about the stories of all kinds of other places, and about also some of the lesser known features of the settlement history. If we go actually back, I'm just going to just jump back into the late 19th century for a second, and as we head into the 1890s, you'll see that that yellow point that emerges there deep into Syria is not a mistake. There were actually a collection of communities. There were five in that region, in the Haran region of Syria, that were briefly established. They didn't make it, so to speak.
By
Um,
whom? By whom? I'm sorry, Daniel, for those of us who don't know, who established those communities in Syria and
yeah,
who
I mean, they were moshavot. They were Jewish farming colonies. There was also, there were brief attempts also.
and were they okay, so my question then, if these are Jewish Moshavot, these are part of this collectivist
Yes.
pioneering spirit, um, and they picked that area because they thought it was part of a Zionist project, they thought it was that area would ultimately be included, or just because why?
Look, at that point in time, 1890s, I mean, we were still very much in the context of the Ottoman Empire, and there
Yeah.
wasn't, people weren't necessarily thinking about, I mean, Herzl was thinking about, but people were not necessarily thinking about an independent polity. They were thinking maybe some kind of autonomy in the context of the Ottoman Empire. I don't honestly know so much about the particulars of that story. In fact, the reason why you only see one dot there is because I haven't actually been able to exactly determine where the other points were. I simply illustrated as an example of just one of many sort of fascinating sort of side streets of this history that I hope the map will draw attention to and lead people to explore in greater detail.
I want to emphasize something, and I think you know this as somebody who thinks about history, and of course, many of our viewers do as well. But what a project like this does, and what any good history does, is show that there wasn't necessarily a teleology or a linearity to what is, for example, today's map, right?
Yeah,
There were roads not taken, and I'm not saying it's good or bad. That's not a
yeah,
question of
yeah,
moralizing or polemicizing about it. It's just that there were roads not taken. I mean, the whole effort to develop the Negev, which was Ben Gurion's dream, and the 11, the 11 nekudot in what is now, we now refer to as the OTEF, or the Gaza envelope, you know, there was the idea by some Zionist thinkers to make the periphery the center and not to have the population centered demographically in its cities.
yeah.
It didn't work for a whole host of complex reasons, but it does let us think about roads not taken, and that's true of every history out there. Um, Things that didn't, quote, succeed are nonetheless extremely valuable historically to understand, you know, and so I think it's, that little yellow dot there in the Homa Valley is it's fascinating. It's just fascinating. What were they thinking? But it made sense. No one knew the Ottoman Empire was going to come crashing down. No one knew the
Yeah.
Russian Empire was going to come crashing down, and no one knew the Habsburg Empire was going to come crashing down. And that imperial transformation of World War One changed the entire landscape of the Middle East and of Europe. So
Yeah,
no one
history
knew.
has all kinds of surprises in store for us. And yes, we can plan, we can come up with proposed solutions, but uh,
So one of our viewers, well, we have two questions. One wants to know, can you click on one of the Arab dots and get further information, or are there too many and you don't know which one has the information? They wanted to make sure that you didn't, or rather, they're querying whether or not you eliminated that function or not. I assume not, but
no, no, no. We eliminated the function from.
of more additional information for the green settlements of
Oh,
Arab.
no, not at all. But I am a little bit nervous about. I didn't plan to sort of showcase one. The difficulty with sometimes with the Arab communities, there are not always as many readily available articles in English. I will say that. Um, but here, let's see. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
not showing up there.
Yeah, yeah, we got something there. That's great. Yeah.
But in any case, you do always get information about when the community was founded. If it ceased to exist, you get information about that. Um,
In the fantasy world, right? You're gonna need partnership with, cartographers and geographers of the Ottoman world who have all the linguistic tools and, um, you,
Absolutely. Look,
I mean, that it would be an incredibly rich, multicultural, multi-historical project. Um,
I have
yeah,
partnered with,
it's
yeah, I
really
mean,
exciting. Yeah.
so for example, there are in the Druze communities on the Golan Heights, there's an organization that's done a lot of mapping of the Golan Heights, and they've shared their some of their data with us, and we're in the process of developing actually a very detailed Golan map. The difficulty there, and this is also the problem, is in some of the regions you have better data for some things than you do for others. So, for
Yeah.
example, in the Golan Heights, it's very hard to track on a year by year basis what existed. There just doesn't seem to be sufficient mapping. But you can do it sort of on a decadal, you can do it decade by decade, more or
Yeah.
less.
Yeah.
So that's, there is a little bit of a challenge here because of the varying data that's available. And yeah, I mean, the biggest challenge, honestly, is securing sufficient funding to really hire the team of researchers that I would like to have to really provide all the information for every point. But there really are so many possibilities with this. I fantasized about having an all the points blog that would sort of talk about different communities and highlight different communities. You could even have all the points tours that would actually showcase some of these communities. There are lots of things that I would love to do. Right now, where I am is just trying to maintain these maps, improve them, and secure funding to expand some of the features. Oftentimes, when I give these talks, pretty much every time I give the talk, I come away with some additional idea of something that it would be nice to include, and it's just a question of having the resources to do it.
Right. So one of our viewers asked about another, and again, I mentioned one of my favorite books, The Atlas of Central Europe, which also has maps where the dots or the nikudot are, and we see this often on a lot of two-dimensional maps, right? The bigger the dot, the bigger the population,
Sure. Yeah.
right? So is that something you thought about
So
doing?
yeah.
Because right now all of your dots
All the
are,
same. Yeah.
the circumference is the same, right?
Exactly. So there are two challenges here. Well, there are a few really. One is again availability of data because if this main map is going year by year, and we don't really have population data at that granular of a level. So I would have to, but I could certainly transform this into sort of like a decade by decade map and incorporate population. The additional problem though is the map gets very busy very quickly, and so if you have the risk is that if you then make dots bigger, they will overshadow other points. And but so that's one issue. There is a part of me that at least at this stage likes the fact that all the points are the same size because it sort of in a way it forces us to think beyond the typical places that we focus on. And as I said before, one of the hopes of the project, one of the goals of the project is to shift people's attention in directions that they don't necessarily look at. But yes, of course, people are all typically the two things that people typically ask me about the most are yes, can you represent population, and what about geographical size of the community? Because they're all the same size these points, even though some communities stretch out over much wider swaths of territory than others. Again, I worry one about what kind of data I'll be able to find for changes in size of communities on a yearly basis, even on a decadal basis. That's one thing, but also just what it will do to the experience of looking at the map if I were to accommodate that. It's also just a tremendous amount of data to try to get a hold of and to add, and that would really require a team of people to
Yeah.
accomplish. But there are two things that I continue to think about and am open to at
Right.
some stage.
Yeah. Well, it's really a fascinating project, Dr. Stein Kokin. I mean, I, I, I think we're all sort of geographically deprived, and it's so very important. And so many of the questions that have come up shed light on how to understand the region. One needs sort of a multiple views on all these points. So I want to thank you. I want to tell everyone that next week's session, I mean, Dr. Steinkoken nodded to it, is going to be points on the imaginations, take sort of more of a literary view. And I think what's important to understand is that in any movement, and including our own country, any kind of national self-definition, whatever that is, the imagination and in literature and poetry and film plays an enormous role in how people understand a place. And it's not true or untrue. Um, so when we use the word imagination, it's not to denigrate it. So that's going to be next week's concluding course, Points of the Imagination, same time, December. It's Wednesday, December 17th at 7. The first session, last week's session, is available on the website, and tonight's session will be available on the website. I want to thank Dr. Stein Kokin. I also want to thank our staff, as always, Karen Small, the managing director of the Bildner Center, Robin Auerbach, the program coordinator. Leah Spector is working tonight as well. And I want to emphasize, it's really my duty, I'm duty bound to do this, to let you know that these free online courses, like most of the programming of the Alan and Joan Bildner Center for the Study of Jewish Life, are free. And they are free because we get support from you and other people to keep our programming accessible. And what we are doing in the largest sense is making Jewish culture, history, languages, um, um, and other aspects of Judaism visible to the Rutgers public, to the community, and in an online course like this, to even a national and international community. So when you think about the end of the year and you're giving, please do not hesitate to understand the value of academic Jewish studies right now. There's been a lot of sense of tension and crisis in the last 2 years about the value of academic Jewish studies. And I want to assert here that programs that we're doing here at the Bildner Center couldn't happen without your support. I also want to tell you that our spring Arresti visiting scholar, Dr. Noam Sienna, is going to give a virtual mini course starting probably January 14th. We're finalizing the dates also for 3 Wednesdays, and it will be on Jewish books in the Islamic world from the Middle Ages until modern times, part of our year-long collaboration with the Rutgers Initiative for the Book, Jewish book culture, printmaking, materiality of textual lives in the Jews in Jewish culture. So I hope you'll join us for that. And I want to thank Dr. Stein Kokin and say goodnight to all of you. And we'll see you next week, same time.